I mean, wasn't that the first media member to ever publish your last name?
Remember, we got in a huge thing about it, and then we had to call in Scott LaBar, and Scott LaBar called me, and I known Scott. Scott is the isn't he like the big editor over there now? At the
he is.
Yeah,
he was a pretty big editor even then.
And Scott gave me my first job in media when I was 11, and so Scott has that kind of power over me. He's like, "Dude, shut up, we're using your name," and then it happened.
Kyle, I gotta be honest. Since we always have fun making fun of Dave on his own show, which is pretty great. Yeah. It was, Dave was just he was feeling his stage name so much that he just couldn't believe that a journalist would want to publish your human name
that's exactly
in an article about you. And I had to talk to Dave about how, Carmichael Dave is a moniker. It's not true. Yes.
Should legally change it to that, and then none of you could do nothing.
The first of many times I won an argument with Dave.
Sam Amick of The Athletic. It's kind of an okay website to read stuff.
I think it's wonderful. Did you know you can subscribe for less than...
That's later.
Okay.
Maybe.
Sorry,
we'll see how he acts. Chris Paul, stall. That's the headline in Oklahoma City. Are you buying that, or do you think this might be a tactic from either Sam Presti or an agent? Do you buy the fact that it's likely Chris Paul is going to start the year in Oklahoma City?
I haven't talked to them in the last couple of days since, I definitely talked to them after that trade went down. At that time, the prospect of him starting the year there was certainly still in play. And there was also kind of a telling message coming from the Thunder side that if Chris wanted to get to his, preferred destination, and, conceivably one of those at least would be Miami to go play with Jimmy Butler, that his agent, Leon Rose, would have work to do. And so that I thought was a sign that, all right, if you're putting the pressure on the agent, that kind of indicates that on the team side, you're not feeling all that optimistic about things. And then, in a couple days after that, the indications I had gotten from the Miami side, from the Jimmy Butler side, were that it was pretty unlikely. It's funny because right before you called, I was reading a story from SBNation.com about Chris Paul and kind of the unintended consequences of him pushing for this kind of old man supermax as the head of the president or the players union. As you guys remember, he was the most vocal guy in the room, basically trying to make sure that, top tier players in their mid-30s were still eligible for the biggest contracts possible. And so now, because he's got a deal that's going to pay him $50 million in the last deal, it's become this albatross that is, weighing him down from a competitive standpoint. I mean, he gets his cash, but that's a long answer to your question. I think it is real that, it's an extremely hard contract to move, and there's only so many Russell Westbrook deals out there to get that kind of a deal done.
Sam Amick joining us. This is kind of a goofy question, Sam, and you can parry it if you want because it's not really your job to think this way. But is Chris Paul getting a raw deal publicly? I wonder that sometimes. Once upon a time, Chris Paul was referred to as point god, one of the coolest, greatest point guards there is. He's a State Farm pitch man. He was a guy. I mean, I don't want to say he was the guy, but you're talking top 10, top 5 player. Now it seems like the narrative of Chris Paul as he gets in the twilight-ish of his career is that he's a locker room problem. He's a prima donna. Nobody wants to play with him. And I heard a national expert say the other day they'd rather have Rajon Rondo than Chris Paul on their team. Is it warranted? In your opinion, is it warranted based on things you've heard and seen, or do you think it's one of those everybody piles on things?
I'll kind of split the difference, but I think part of it is that a lot of people, players, coaches, even media members, I think bit their tongue or held back during the Clippers years about some of his idiosyncrasies personality-wise, because it's kind of like that's the fringe benefit that comes with being the guy. And when you're so dominant like he was back then, it's a little bit like Westbrook. I mean, if you read, we have a piece on our site that I thought was awesome where we had 4 former Oklahoma City Thunder beat writers analyze the Russell Westbrook trade, right? So 4 people with unique insight on Russ and his experience at OKC. And I read this thing, and this relates to the Chris Paul deal, but like I read this and I'm thinking to myself, like, man, this insight is super interesting. And I knew a lot of it, but it's sometimes you can't really share that stuff when the guy's still there, when the guy's still dominant. Now that he's gone, it's like, well, let's pull the curtain back even farther. Now with Chris, it's a similar dynamic, I think, where now that the results are not as good as they were before, because even though he hadn't gotten to the conference finals for so many years, very good regular season player in the MVP discussion. He's a tough personality, man. Like, he's really tough, and he's very controlling. And when he left the Clippers, one of the main things you would always hear is just that he even from a life standpoint, he's that guy at the party where and in fact, I think SNL had an old skit about this where you kind of say, oh man, we had a good time yesterday. We went and saw this neat museum in Washington, D.C. And he'd be like, well, I had lunch at the White House.
Right.
So like, and President Obama came in and sat down with me. So that would rub people the wrong way. And then in the locker room, he had this incredible ability to be like the number one irritant in a lot of different ways. But then when push came to shove and the blame got, assessed, it would be some role guy, some Gerald Green taking the fall. So, I mean, he's a tough personality. When I look back at this era, I almost think we should do an analysis of like, I know I'm rambling here, but like the way that certain personalities impacted their own legacy. And right now, like Steph Curry is a guy who I'm fascinated by because he opened the door for Kevin Durant because he has a different wiring than a Chris Paul, than a Russell Westbrook. But now Kevin's gone. Now he's got to, continue to build off of what he has done. So personality is a huge part of this, and Chris's is pretty tough.
Sam Amick joining us. No relation, Chris Paul to Rich Paul. He's been getting a little bit of press lately. He had a big deal happen that broke yesterday, moving to United Talent Agency, who took a big stock in his Clutch Sports. Just looking back over the summer and the way things are, is Rich Paul the most powerful person in the NBA that not enough people are talking about? Am I overstating his power? It's a great story, but I'm just curious as to where he lies in that situation, because it seems like he really did control much of the goings-on this summer.
He did. I mean, I think, he's being talked about plenty. And there's also, you're doing something right when there's a lot of jealousy. Yeah. And there is a lot around Rich. I mean, the other day I was, in touch with another agent who rightly was kind of chronicling and almost kind of complaining about the idea that a lot of, if you hear that noise, boys, I apologize.
What was that?
We have a cat fight in the front yard.
Actual cats, or there's like a human fight? Okay.
There's two cats. It's our cat and the neighbor cat. They always get into it. Hold on, I'm going to break it up. Get out of here. Joey, be quiet. Knock it off.
If you just want to hold your phone out, that would be amazing. Are they still going at it?
They're staring at each other.
Okay. All right. Well, if they break in, just don't be afraid. Do a play-by-play. You were talking about the agent.
I lost my train of thought.
The agent and Rich Paul.
Yeah, he was kind of saying how if you really, really analyze a lot of the different moves, I mean, there have been missteps along the way by him where his client, if you analyze it critically, that, they ended up losing a bunch of money. But in terms of power and in terms of, guys getting where they want to go, I mean, he's done that. And Anthony Davis got to the Lakers, and now Rich is growing, and he's growing in the kind of way that definitely is important for him. Because, like, if you know him at all, like, the one thing that he rages against is the perception that he's just kind of drafting off LeBron, like that drives him nuts. So this is a big move for him to kind of send that message that he's way bigger than LeBron now. So he's, the guy was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, so
right.
I think he's being talked about a pretty decent amount.
Last thing for you, when we look back at this free agency period and the amount of talent that switched teams, you had players forcing themselves to other teams, whether it's Anthony Davis or Paul George. You had owners giving up like the next 40 years of first-round picks that they had, other than having to follow the Stepien rule guidelines Do you think we're anywhere near a point where Adam Silver and the NBA is going to need to step in at the next negotiations with the Players Association? Or are we getting to the point where they're going to need to, whether it's adjust the cap, give more benefit to teams re-signing their own players? I know they've moved in this direction before, but are they going to have to save these teams from themselves, especially when it comes to stuff like draft picks?
I mostly know what you mean, but what's your number one critique of what do you think this summer exposed in terms of what's not working?
Well, I think you had I don't think it's healthy, and by the way, biased guy here. I don't think it's particularly healthy when you have almost every upper tier talented, in fact, I think every upper tier talented player leaving a team voluntarily going to a big market. You saw, with the exception of maybe Mike Conley, who went from Memphis to Utah. As you know, you saw Paul George and Kawhi Leonard go to L.A. You saw LeBron James last year and Anthony Davis this year go to L.A. You saw Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant going to New York. Jimmy Butler going to a glamour market in Miami. Russell Westbrook going to Houston. There's that, for example. And that's helped by not just state taxes in some cases, but also shoe companies. Do you think the NBA is going to take a look at that at some point and say it's getting way too easy for bigger markets to be able to snatch up these talented players because of outside the court ramifications?
Yeah, it's obviously a problem. And the one, I think, hole in that argument that people have pointed out is that, like Brooklyn and the Clippers in particular, you can't gloss over how functional they have become as organizations.
Sure.
They did some serious things to earn these players in terms of earning their trust, sending that message that they were a place worthy of coming to. That being said, the Clippers will be the first to admit that if they were not located where they are, then Kawhi Leonard would not come. Even if it was like Miami, he would not come.
Sure.
He wanted to be in his home area. That's LA. I don't know what the answer is. Yes, they're going to analyze all this stuff. They came up with that Supermax largely to give the hometown team, that type of an edge, but it had all kinds of unintended consequences. I mean, the Kings went through that in a fascinating way, right, where they chose not to give it to DeMarcus Cousins because the number becomes so big that it, to their credit, they avoided that what would have been a massive mistake. And then the flip side of that is when it's a quote-unquote no-brainer and a person who everybody thinks should get it, a Russell Westbrook, even John Wall. You go back and read the media coverage when the Wizards gave it to John Wall.
Yeah.
Nobody was critical. Nobody. And now it's just destroyed, whatever plans they had. So those conversations are ongoing among the governors and within the league and at Summer League in particular. They had a meeting where that was definitely discussed. And I don't know, you hear stuff about shorter contracts that essentially so the team wouldn't have to be on the hook for as long. You hear stuff about if you keep the contracts long, do you put something in there where players simply cannot be traded for the first 3 years because then if they wanted to force their way out, they just simply couldn't. The ideas are flowing. That trend is certainly, unmistakable, and, we'll see where it all goes.
Well, and just to follow up as we wrap up, too, Kawhi Leonard, for example, speaking of money, in the Clippers, signed a 3-year, $103 million contract, which works out, if you do the math, 12,875,000 subscriptions to The Athletic. That's right. If you go by their monthly rate, that's almost 13 million subscriptions to The Athletic with the layout that they have, the excellent journalism across the board. Go get yourself a subscription today. In fact, they've got deals all the time, and Sam Amick, one of many fine writers that writes for them. Did I get you? No reaction. Did I get you there?
You got me a little bit. I pivoted into promotion mode, and I have to keep this vague because I think I'm under human resources obligations to. You're a soccer fan, aren't you?
I am.
So since you're such a big supporter of The Athletic, I would suggest if you haven't poked around on the news today, and you enjoy The Athletic, and I'm going to put it this way: world domination is coming, and I think some of the coverage that you enjoy the most is coming your way. I don't know if you saw these headlines about reported expansion. That's all I can say.
Maybe.
To a place that we might be vacationing here pretty soon.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Going to England, man. Never been over there before.
Where is that where you're going next week?
Yeah.
What? Yeah. Get out of here.
My sister lives out there now. Yeah. It's going to be fun.
Taking the whole fam?
Going across the pond. Yep.
Wow.
Whole group.
That's a lot of money for a couple of little kids to fly on a plane. Doesn't that hurt just a little bit? Every time I take my kids somewhere, it's
it doesn't hurt. I paid for it 6 months ago, so that part's okay.
Okay.
And then when you have a relative on the other side, you can stay at their house a lot, so that's a little cheaper. You know.
That's true.
And truthfully, you know, and then we got John and his lovely family to help watch our house on the street, so we're in good shape.
I'll get over there and get off the plane. Just go, good day. Throw another shrimp on the barbie. You know, whatever.
No.
No,
don't do
Australia.
That. For sure,
I'm sorry.
For sure, don't do that.
Same thing.
Not England.
Absolutely don't say that.
They talk. Sam, have a safe trip. We will not be talking to you for a few weeks. Enjoy your vacation. Your lovely and patient wife, along with the rest of your family, very much deserve it, as I'm sure you know. Turn off your phone, would you please, and enjoy yourself.
Thank you, gents. We'll talk to you down the road.
Right.
Appreciate you.
Take care.
The Drive.